Yes, in a good way, a positive way. Dr. Vuyi, over to you. Thank you, everybody, for indulging me. You may have your seat.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon already. Let me say first that it is an honor for me to stand here today in front of you. I feel really so honored. Thank you so much, DDG, and to the acting DG as well. I appreciate the invitation. This is a women's event, and we are here to speak to women that are here. As I've been already introduced, I'm Dr. Vuyi Tsako, and I was given a theme of this event which says, "Beautiful woman, rise." And I added to say, you are in a storytelling business. So I want to say to all women that are here that you are in a storytelling business. No one else will know your story more than you or better than you. I was given a topic to talk to, which is navigating through professional and social challenges. I don't think it was a mistake for me to be given this topic. And I trust a lot in some of, when we say in Xhosa, amaqhalo nezaci, kuthiwa umazi wendlela ngoseke wayihamba. You learn from the elders. You get wisdom from the elders. The elder is not meaning an old person in terms of age, but what I'm going to share with you today, it's my story. It might not be your story, but I believe that the wisdom that we are going to gather from here, it will assist you one day. In my career life, I have got quite a number of stories, but today I want to share only 2 stories with you. The first story is about connecting the dots. I'll start with the background that maybe might be a little bit boring, but you'll see it when we get along or when we go through the whole story. How does it connect with the dots? I grew up in a rural location in Eastern Cape, Pedi, and I grew up without my parents. Maybe you'll relate also to what Umahlongwane have just said. I grew up without my parents. We were 9 at home that time. 5 were from my mother and 4 from my aunt. So we're 9 kids in total. The oldest was 15 years and the youngest was 5 years. And during that time, there were no cellular phones. My mother would visit once in a while. And even when it comes to us being bought groceries, we knew very well that we'll get our grocery at the end of the month exactly. What used to happen during that time is that there will be supermarkets where you'll find the same supermarkets in Port Elizabeth where my parents were working. They'll go to that supermarket and pay for the groceries, and the one that is local will come and deliver. So there will be situations where you would find out that the grocery that was meant for the month could not last for the month because we're 9 in total. But we'll have to wait till the end of the month until we get the new groceries. Fortunately, at that time, the neighbors were so caring. It was cultural, it was traditional that as a neighbor, you have to look after the kids of your neighbor. So they were so caring. There was no day or time when we were without food at home. Fast forward, I moved to Port Elizabeth and I finished my matric there. There was a time, because in PE I started with grade 11 and grade 12. And there was a time when my father would walk with me around, or even I would accompany him to go and see his friends. And on his way, when we meet some of his friends, he would introduce me as the second daughter who is the doctor. And at that time, I was only at grade 11 and 12. And in my mind, the only doctor that I knew that time was a medical doctor. Remember, I was coming from the rural areas. I never knew about PhDs and all of that. I only knew that the doctor is a medical doctor. And at that point in time, I can say that My maths and English and even physical science were not so good. Mind you, I was coming from a rural areas where even English was taught in Xhosa. So for me, to be told that I am a doctor, so, and I was so clumsy because those days when we were coming from rural areas and then you go to your towns and urban areas, would be seen by other kids, even the way in which you dress yourself. Nonetheless, I passed my matric. The results were not so good, but when I was in rural areas at Feni, I passed my grade 10, which was standard 8, in flying colors. Remember, the standard won't be the same. And as I'm telling you, in rural areas, even if you are taught math syllabus, when they are done with algebra, they won't go to geometry and trigonometry. They won't. Because even them, those teachers, they did not know the geometry and the trigonometry. So I think from standard 6 up to standard 8, I only knew geometry in maths. The textbook had trigonometry and geo. I only knew. And I mastered the algebra, in mathematics. I passed my matric. The conditions were not good. My parents were very strict. And during those days, parents would say that, I'm done with you. You've got your matric, I'm done with you. So you'll know or you'll see what you want to do going forward. And at that time, I made a lot of applications. I applied at Forte University and other universities, and I was lucky enough to get a lot of acceptance from Forte. When I showed my father the letter, I discovered that he only had 500 rand at the bank. And then that was a time when I decided to look for technical colleges, which is your TVET colleges. And I found the technical college where I had to do a 2-year certificate in office admin. So during that period, there were a lot of bursaries in public schools. I applied for bursary, and then I managed to finish my 2-year certificate. Post that, it was expected that I should look for a job. And the way in which I was so determined, it was like I'm a firstborn at home, whilst I was a secondborn. I would wake up. I remember we finished exams in November. I would wake up every Monday morning and go to a place that was called Swartkops. Why Monday? Because every Monday there was a paper called Herald. Only on Monday that paper will publish positions. So locally where I was staying still, there were no libraries that time. There were no post offices that time. So I would wake up every Monday, walk to Swartkops to buy, to get the newspaper because there was a library. To get the newspaper, there were public telephones. Then I would write down all the positions that I see that I'm comfortable with. I will make a call in those public telephones. I'll also write my applications at the library and post those applications. What kept me going in that regard was that I was so persistent in my approach. I would not miss any Monday without going to Swartkops. And secondly, one would ask, where would you get all this money every Monday to go to Swartkops? It was not easy. My parents, when it comes to money, they were not playing. They'll say, go look for the job, but they won't tell you how. And they won't give you money to go and look for the job. Unfortunately, we had a lot of family support. We used to sell amanqina nenhloko, and then we get that money, we collect it, and then we go to Swartkops, and then we apply for the positions. I go to Swartkops and apply for the positions. I did that consistently, and after a period of 2 months, I was invited for the interview. I was 19 years old. That was my first job at Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality. When I say that I have more than 20 or 25 years experience, others won't believe within the municipality. My first employer was Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality. Let me say that the only thing that I could recall about those interviews, one was that I cried for the most time of the interviews. Why I was crying? It was the first time or my first encounter to see a boardroom full of white people. Remember, I was coming from rural areas, and when I entered that boardroom, it was full of white people. There was only one African woman, and that African woman happened to be a shop steward at that time. So there were white males and only one white female. And without even starting to open my mouth, I cried. I became nervous. I even lost the thin English that I had at that time. When the members of the panel realized that I cannot speak, I want to say something, but I'm unable to say it. They spoke to the shop steward to say, tell her to speak in vernacular, then you will interpret for us. But what I discovered the time when I was continuing speaking in my own language, there were certain things that were added by this African woman, which I never said, but I realized that because I could understand English. Mind you, I could understand English, but the challenge was to write. I realized that these things are not negative. They are not meant to dent me, but they are meant to make me. I left that interview with the view that this is not for me. First of all, me Nanje, I cannot work with white people. I'm coming from a rural area where we won't even see a white person even in town. So now I'm seeing these people and what was amazing also, which I never took cognizance of, was that the chairperson who was the manager was Mr. Vermeulen. The assistant manager who was there was Mrs. Vermeulen, the wife to Mr. Vermeulen. And there was a supervisor, Mr. Vermeulen, who was the son to these Vermeulens. So that was the situation that time, and I told myself that, maybe the Vermeulens gave the position to their other Vermeulens. Fast forward, I was offered the position. And it came as a surprise to me. I was of the view that I didn't make it, but I looked forward. I didn't stop going to Swartkops and apply for positions. On my first day at work, the lady who was a shop steward in those interviews came to visit me, to congratulate me, to wish me well, and all of that. And she said to me, guess what? When you were crying, I saw poverty in your tears. I saw tears of a poor person. I saw tears of a person who is hungry for something. And I decided to fill in the gaps for you. And when I was thinking back about the situation, I asked myself, amongst us as women, how many of us are capable of filling the gaps for other women? In nowadays, we speak of pull head down syndromes, and those things were not there 20 years ago. I remember in my first job, I worked with a lot of old ladies. I was like a child. I was treated like a child. But now if I see a young lady like this speaking English as if she's in the TV, I'll start becoming jealous at the age of 40-something. And the child is only 20 years old. This lady said, I saw tears of a poor person, of a person who's hungry for something. I just imagined in the past week when I was preparing for this, a comparison between tears of a poor person and tears of a rich person. You know, when a poor child is crying, he don't even have a tissue to wipe the tears off. He would take the clothes and wipe, and you'll see even the way in which tears are falling, that these tears are coming from a person who's poor. And I happened to read, when I thought of this, a book by Warren Zangare. This book is very cheap, but you can learn a lot from it. It's only $3. You can order it online. It's called Tears of the Poor. Lack of empathy is destroying humankind. In that book, her argument is that who are these people fighting against God? Because he regarded humankind as God's creation. And who is God? To me, God is the force of nature, the creator. Now, if we're fighting against the creator, meaning that is humans against the creator of the earth. So that book and its content, it grew inside me to an extent whereby I told myself that the empathy that was given to me 20 years ago, I have to give it back to others. But unfortunately, in nowadays, we live in a very different society. A lot has been said. In my first job, I was earning 3,700 per month. And guess what happened in those days? You would give your salary to your parents, and then they'll give you a bus fare and money for hair, for everything. So I understood the situation at that point in time. It was relevant. 3,700 was a lot. You know, at times, because I'm corporate services, I've been within the HR space for a long time. There used to come general workers in my office when I was working in KZN. And they would say, I was the GM, we are here to ask for a grade. And my colleague would laugh. And I would say, no, I can relate to that. Because when I was earning 3.7, I would go to my boss and say, I'm asking for an increase. This money is not sufficient. I have to pay for the bond. I have to pay for my education and all of that. So sometimes what you go through in life makes you to understand other people. At that time, it was post-94. At that time. It was the time when in most government environments, local government or provincial or national government, they were undergoing the process of transformation, which meant that white people that were in charge were substituted by your black or African people, except for those positions that required certain expertise. So those white people would remain there. So in our environment, a lot of black males, I would say males because most of them were males, entered the system as directors, executive directors, and all of that. But there was something that I noticed during that period, that for you to climb up the ladder, you have to agree to sexual advances by these men. And that's what made me to stay there in lower position for a period of 8 years. And I said to myself, my parents never taught me this, so I won't agree. Others agreed and they were promoted. I don't know what happened after that. So I told myself that in as much as I'm coming from a poor background, my parents were so principled. They knew very well what has to be done by a child and what needs not to be done. And then if I can talk about connecting the dots, because when I left Nelson Mandela at that time, already I had my master's degree and I was an assistant director. And you know what? I got promoted because of a female again, who happened to be amongst those that were promoted in senior positions. At that time, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward, as it was during the early years of my career. But it was very clear looking backward 10 years later. I had to trust that the dots will somehow connect in my future, and that belief gave me confidence to follow my heart. That's when post that period I entered into management and leadership positions. And from the age of 30 to 32 years, the future looked so promising when I left Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality. And I was looking forward to move to greater heights. That takes me to the second part of my story, which is the dawn and dusk. I made it simple to say sunrise and sundown. And this part is characterized by some positives, which made me to be so excited, and some negatives. Initially, I felt that I found what I really wanted in life. From moving one place to another as an executive and director in municipalities and public entities, and in most cases, I was headhunted. And that was a good and memorable part of my career. I was a well-known disciplinarian and would pride myself for being able to instill a culture of discipline in the workplace. I believe that I had arrived. until I reached a point where I found my career and myself being jeopardized or threatened by the political environment. It was at the time when I was already the municipal manager in one of the KZN municipalities. During that time, I had a tendency where if I am confronted with challenging situations, I would write a paper and publish it. That helped me a lot because now when I look at my papers, I'm able to say this one is when I was working here as this. During the 2 years that I served this municipality, I wrote 2 papers. One was on political instability, patronage, and factionalism. And the second one was on leadership reputation. Upon realizing that I cannot stand the situation at that time, as the environment affected my well-being, I later on decided to resign due to ill health. At that time, I was already in the national executive of the Institute for Local Government Managers, where I was amongst the municipal managers leading in the country. I had much love for local government. However, that environment left me with a lot of scars. I really don't know what to do. I did not know what to do for a few months after I left the environment. I felt that I had let down the previous and current generation of leadership in the local government sphere, and that I dropped the baton as it was being passed to me as a woman. At that time and in the whole country, few, which is not more than 10 females, were municipal managers, and in KZN only 5. And most of those were later faced with a similar problem and left. Citing from my paper on factionalism and patronage, and for those who don't get what I mean, I made some points to say. I first defined a faction as a group with a degree of organization, shared identity, binding agreements, and on common goals. It's a disciplined group conscious of their own existence that exists to achieve a certain objective. And I have to say that you find a faction everywhere. Even in churches, you see the factions. In some of the churches, even in families, you'll see the factions. I further noted, a relationship characterized by factions is as good as when those common goals or binding agreements are met. However, challenges of persecution, treasure hunt, characterized by tug of war, log rolling, and finally reputation damage kicks in. I refused to be part and being used by the factions, and such had led to the scars that I got. In my other publication, and when I speak of leadership reputation in my other paper, I pointed out that it can take you 20 years to build a good reputation and 5 minutes to reign.